Hello, and welcome to Nightly News for January 2nd, 1970. Tonight's broadcast will be a special recap of the events of the past decade. I'm your host, Brendan Coyle.
And I'm Brandon Stafford.
Tonight we'll start off our program with foreign affairs, highlighting Vietnam and the Cold War.
After World War II, relations have been strained between the United States and the Soviet Union, including nuclear weapons, government styles, capitalism versus communism, as well as domestic and foreign policies between the two.
At the beginning of the decade, Nikita Khrushchev came to power in the Soviet Union. When President Eisenhower left office, tensions were focused on the conversion of foreign nations to capitalistic or communistic societies. In 1962, U.S. intelligence acquired knowledge that IRBMs were being shipped from the Soviet Union to Cuba. This caused a panic in the nation and led to a blockade of Cuba and a diplomatic crisis. Negotiations between Kennedy and Khrushchev were initiated, and right as violent confrontation seemed inevitable, a resolution was reached. Khrushchev agreed to remove missiles from Cuba, and it seemed that Armageddon had been averted.
At the beginning of the decade, Americans as a whole were supportive of the containment of communism, and thus the continuation of the Vietnam War. The conflict was quickly escalated with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which U.S. naval vessels were allegedly attacked by North Vietnamese assault craft. Congress quickly passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave the executive branch a blank check to address the war. As war actively increased, investigations led to the discoveries of multiple massacres of Vietnamese civilians by U.S. troops.
The most infamous of these incidents was the My Lai massacre, in which U.S. troops slaughtered an entire village of Vietnamese women, children, and elderly civilians. This was not an isolated incident, which resulted in growing U.S. sentiment against the war.
We will now cut to our field reporter in Vietnam.
Hello and welcome to Nightly News. I'm your reporter, Brendan Coyle. I'm in the field at Vietnam as we travel through the unstable countryside.
Hey, that instability? Put that helmet on.
As you can see, we're taking all precautionary measures to stay safe as we travel through the country. We'll be taking a look at the war-ravaged villages as they are attacked by both North Vietnamese soldiers and American troops, depending on... Charlie! We're under attack! Ambush, 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 ambush! Oh my god, our delegation's down! We gotta go, we gotta go! What are you doing? Let's go, let's go! Run, run, run! Capitalist! What? Stop! We surrender! Ah! We're done, we're done! What do you want with us? We're just a reporter! Ah! What can we do?
You can't do anything, Central? They're both dead.
Where's the radios?
They're dead!
They had the radios?
No! Medic's dead!
No! How did this happen?
Them!
What are you doing? No! Why? He didn't do anything. We surrender. We surrender.
Capitalist dogs. Capitalist. Don't want you. Don't want you.
Hello? Brendan, talk to me. What's going on out there? Hello? We seem to have lost contact with Vietnam. Moving on.
Perhaps the most obvious result of the countercultural movement of the past decade is the hippies. Hippies are loosely defined as a group who live communally, experiment with psychedelic drugs, participate in eclectic music scene, and wear a certain style of dress including jeans, loose clothing, barefoot walking, bright or tie-dye garments. The styles were the same for both males and females to emphasize the point of gender roles were unimportant. Hippies came about with the sexual revolution, and so they practiced free love and open relationships, a controversial topic to the American public.
The music of the counterculture took the decade by storm, bringing much of Britain's music to Yankee shores. Artists like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Pink Floyd, and the Beach Boys amassed immense popularity within the United States. The epitome of the 1960s music, as well as the culture in general, came at Woodstock in New York during the summer of 1969. It was a 3-day festival that took place on 15 acres of land with 450,000 people in attendance over the 3-day period, and the Monday morning on which Jimi Hendrix famously performed his rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. The festival is being hailed as a turning point in rock and roll.
In short, the counterculture embodied the creative and cultural business that took hold in the 1960s. Though the hippies have become the iconic image of the movement, the counterculture embodies everyone who practiced any of the aforementioned beliefs.
We will now cut to a clip of the LA riots.
During Kennedy's regime, both peaceful and violent protests for equality continued and increased. President Johnson continued to experience the force of the blacks' will until the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, guaranteeing rights to blacks, women, and homosexuals. The most notable moments in the civil rights movement came with the Montgomery bus boycott, the assault of Bull Conrad against peaceful protesters, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, as well as the events following the Freedom Riders and the assaults taken against them.
As the decade began, both American and Soviet governments were pouring unprecedented amounts of money into the science and math programs in order to gain a lead in the space race. By 1961, the Soviets had put the first man in space. The Soviets led in the space race alarmed Americans and made the majority uncomfortable with the idea of increasing technological advances by the Soviets. In May of 1961, President Kennedy made his famous Man on the Moon speech, declaring that Americans would put a man on the moon at the end of the decade. On July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 successfully reached the moon, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to set foot on the moon. As the decade came to a close, Americans appear the leaders of the space race. And now we will cut to footage of the construction of Soviet satellites and the launch of an American space shuttle.
Достигшей под руководством коммунистической партии величайшего прогресса, удалось, выведя на орбиту спутник, впервые проникнуть за пределы земной атмосферы.
Four, three, two, one, lift off!
The decade's most iconic pop culture icon, Marilyn Monroe, died on August 5, 1962. Monroe's final years were marked by many troubling occurrences, and her death was ruled as a probable suicide from a barbiturate overdose. She was 36 years old. And now we will show you a reenactment of Marilyn Monroe's death.
Dead.
And now we will show you the terrifying footage of the president's assassination.
Amazing grace, how sweet.
Thank you for joining our 1960s Decade Recap. We'll see you tomorrow night with the evening news start the new decade. And now, to finish the night off, scenes from Woodstock.